Hello everyone and welcome to TV Talks, the show where I take a look at both the good and the bad of what television has to offer. And today we're definitely taking a look at something very weird and very abnormal, the Thumb Wrestling Federation. For those of you who don't remember, back in 2007 on Cartoon Network, right before they were hitting the rough era, this was kind of a thing actually. People were actually getting kind of excited for it because around 5 o'clock, right when one of the shows ended, instead of having a commercial break, they would show one of these episodes. And for whatever reason, it really took off. There was a lot of merchandise around it. There were shirts, books, and DVDs, and even toys, which were horribly made, actually, apparently. Apparently the stitch work was really bad. They didn't make about half the wrestlers or something. I don't know incredibly much about that, but the point stands. This was a thing for a while, but then it just kind of dropped off the face of the earth. Because it was a very brief fad, but the people behind it thought it was going to be something like that would last forever, like G.I. Joe or My Little Pony or Transformers or something. But it clearly wasn't meant to be that. It was just a little brief phenomenon. But what is this brief phenomenon? It's Thumb Wrestling Federation. I can't tell if it was made in England or Canada. To my knowledge, Canada, but I know it was the most popular up in the UK. It was a show about thumb wrestlers, the good guys, the Dexteras, and the bad guys, the Sinistras, who would wrestle each other. And if the Sinistras would win the championship for the tournament, their leader, Senator Skull, would take over the world somehow. I don't know how that works, but to be fair, that's one of the jokes, is that his plan makes absolutely no sense, even though Senator Skull himself is actually quite intimidating as a villain. So, who are the characters for this? Well, isn't that the million-dollar question? Because as it's a wrestling thing, there are about, I don't know, like 60 characters or something, although I'll mention that for sure because the characters are definitely something I have kind of wanted to talk about for a while, because I remember when this was a thing and I watched it back then, but I don't know, I've always kind of had this certain feeling towards it, which I'll explain later, but I don't know exactly how to describe it without giving anything away, so we might as well move on. I'm going to go season by season instead of just describing the show as a whole, because the seasons are like entirely different entities. It's almost like a new crew got behind every single one of them. There's new writing styles, new motion, new effects, sometimes even new masks that the characters would wear on their thumbs. So the whole thing is hosted by Dick Thompson and Colonel Cossack, who one of the former is a regular announcer, and then the latter is absolutely insane, and then they commentate over the matches. The matches will put one Dexter and one Sinistra together, they'll fight, one of them will win, and then sometimes they may go to the quarterfinals, or sometimes they'll just disappear for a while, and then come back a few seasons later, or just never again. I'll talk about that. There are a lot of characters, but the main ones are thusly. For the Dexteras, there was Vinny Vitti Victory, probably the most generic good guy, just he came from the mean streets and now he is good and nice. And he's the leader of the Dexteras, and there's Hometown Huck, my least favorite character, because he's just smiley and country boy, city, happy, excitable. Then there's Wasabi, who is a poet. That's basically it, and she rhymes all the time. Then there's Mr. Extremo, who's a really dude guy who does a lot of extreme sports. As you can tell, the Dexteras aren't really quite my favorite, but then there again there's Face Off Phil, who's a Canadian stereotype, but even though he's not exactly the most unique character, I still think he's kind of funny. Then we get to the Sinistras. This is where things actually get pretty interesting. There's Senator Skull, the maniacal leader, who wants to destroy the world and take over the world and cause as much pain as possible. There's the Big Time, who's this big, colossal, showboating guy, almost kind of like John Cena is, but actually even hammier, and he actually has talent, and he just will do anything to make himself look good. Itsy Bitsy, the spider mutant, who is very, very strange, and I think the voice actress for her might have been in that really weird movie G-Force with, I don't know if you remember that movie, I think it was like Guinea Pigs or something. I haven't seen that in years, and boy was that forgettable. And then there was Enfuego. I'm kind of confused with him. He was a Spaniard who likes dancing and stuff, but then I guess the gimmick was that he'd dance so much that he'd burn things up. There's one more character that I'll mention, Evil Ira, who was at first on the Dexteras, but in season 1 ended up betraying the Dexteras and moving to the Sinistras. And he's probably my favorite of the mainstay wrestlers just because of how cool he is. He's kind of a vampire guy with a third eye who can hypnotize people. Even though he kept getting demolished in his first couple matches because, well, they put him up against really brutish people like a Viking. I'll mention that later. But so yeah, as you can tell, the mainstay characters, it's kind of divided. I like the Sinistras far more than the Dexteras because the Dexteras don't have as many interesting characters. But here's the thing, the really interesting characters are always pushed to the sidelines, like the Visitor. My personal favorite, he's an alien who's come down to wrestle and just to inflict pain, and he's only been in a few matches at first, but then since recently they realized he was really popular, so they decided to use him more. There's Corbata, an obnoxious video game guy who is just this horrible troll person. There's Fly Guy, who is a fly mutant person who doesn't even really care about wrestling. He just wants to annoy the crap out of his opponents. Dwayne Bramage, a mental patient. Sir Serpent, a refined Englishman, who in actuality is just this horrible person. Dorsal Flynn, who's a parody of Bill Cosby. Gary the Intern. Gil the Mutant. Ouch the Bandage Guy. Okay, these people are a lot more interesting. But the thing is, they're all get sidelined by people like Vinny Victory or Wasabi. In fact, there is a huge chunk of these characters that we only see once and never again. In fact, I have a list of them right here. Let's go over them, shall we? They are Big Star, Flashback, Laughing Looney, Fly Guy, the Amoeba, Dwayne Bramage, and Sir Serpent. All those characters we have only seen once and then never seen... Okay, actually, on second thought, we did see Big Star in a short episode later on, which I will explain what those are, and Sir Serpent got a very minor cameo in Season 4, but other than that, we never see those people again, not even a whisper. In fact, Flashback only appeared in the first episode, the pilot, and never seen again. Again, we get way too much of Hometown Huck and Itsy Bitsy and the Big Time, but we don't get people that we really want to see, like Sir Serpent, or the Scorchion, or like Pierre Pamplinis, or whatever, or even Milty the Clown. See, it's characters that we want to see just getting pushed into the background, and then characters that we're getting tired of just getting pushed to the foreground, kind of like Total Drama was towards the middle and later part of the series. Although, I haven't quite seen the Redorculus race or whatever it is, so that's to be determined. Anyways, Season 1 as a whole was kind of standard. The writing style was actually kind of funny. For a really cheap kids show, it actually put a lot of effort into its writing and characters and even effects sometimes. I mean, sure, they look pretty lame, but it's still pretty good. And they kind of sometimes make fun of how cheap it is and how lame it is. It's very self-aware of what it was. It knew it was just this little thing, but it also tried to take itself seriously, but not too seriously. Things turned out pretty well, although the suspense was pretty bad at times because it was pretty obvious who was going to make it in the quarterfinals because people like Hometown Huck, Itsy Bitsy, Evil Ira, and Fuego, all those major ones I mentioned, they had 2 matches and they won both of them, again against more interesting characters, like Gil the Swamp Monster, who was battling Itsy Bitsy over who could be the most disgusting. The Lost Viking, a Viking who was frozen in a glacier, and then who was awakened in this present day and only knows how to fight. Billy Batboy, the most inept person imaginable. Again, why don't we get more of these guys? But then things started happening into a lot more stories, like there was this guy on the sidelines of the Dexteras named Pinky, who was, I guess, sort of their intern, aside from Gary the Intern, who was ironically their wrestler who was not an intern. He was trying to prove himself and trying to get stronger, but he never really found the chance. He cost Wasabi the semi-final match against the Big Time. Then Evil Ira ended up betraying the Dexteras, which actually was foreshadowed in his match against Fuego. And then we had the championship, Hometown Huck versus the Big Time. To be honest, I was rooting for the Big Time because Huck really makes my ears bleed. And then they came to this part where the fandom, because yes, there was a fandom at the time, I had to do some research on this, they didn't know how to feel about this finale because what happens is they both knock each other unconscious and they just fall to the ground. Then Pinky, in order to prove himself, lifts Huck on top of the Big Time and then he pins him and then wins. I'm very torn on this because on one hand it's kind of a lame story move because he didn't actually win, but on the other hand I guess it was foreshadowed enough to make it good. But I guess Pinky wasn't really the best choice for that because you could use Captain Esplanade, a character they've only used, okay, once. Maybe I should have put him on the list too. He was only in like 1 or 2 shorts, as well as one match where he didn't even wrestle because he was just talking about how bad Dorsal Flynn was, really, saying that he didn't bring him into the Dexteras and all. His gimmick is that he's an outspoken, tough man who's a very manly man who's full of manhood. But then when it comes time for him to fight the Sinistras, he's always hiding on the sidelines like a cowardly little baby. Wouldn't it make more sense for him to be the one who finally stands up and finally finds purpose in himself instead of this random Pinky guy? I guess for what it was, Season 1 was actually a guilty pleasure of mine. It actually kind of amounted to some pretty good, funny things. Then Season 2 rolled around and the photography got a lot better. There were new characters added like Rolf the Reaper, the depressed German, Mahi Mahi Mindy, who is a crazy environmental activist, Big Bad Billy Goat Tetsky, that's a weird name, who is an old man who was raised by goats. This is where things start getting a little more experimental. Now, Season 2 did improve on a lot of things. It got better writing, it got more action, and it made the winners a lot less obvious. The one issue I have with it is it's very, very short. Because most of the seasons are 20 to 22 episodes, this is only 12. And even then, they don't have a quarterfinal match. They just have like 1 or 2 semifinals. And, well, as you can imagine, that's not really very good, and it's not very well organized. They did have the Royal Thumble tournament thing, but even then, nobody really saw that because that didn't really get aired in America, now did it? Even then, the season turned out pretty well, and actually Senator Skull got into the championship, which made it a lot more epic and a lot more exciting. Well, as much as thumb wrestling could possibly be. But Season 2 also, remember, this was made when it was becoming a bigger hit, so they decided to make short episodes to air alongside them. From what I could tell, they're mostly just DVD or iTunes exclusive, but I was able to track down a lot of them. It kind of made the world seem bigger, a lot more expansive, I guess. There were episodes where Evil Ira had a chest that'd give you your fondest desires or what you deserve most. Hometown Hut got a hamburger and Senator Skull got attacked by snakes. There was one where Evil Ira's conscience tries to bring him back to the Dexteras. There's one where Big Star goes on a game show and does absolutely horrible at it. There's one where Ouch visits the doctor. And they even had these little segments in before matches with trash talk where the wrestlers who were about to wrestle just started yelling at each other. A lot of times they were just okay, but sometimes they were actually pretty funny, like the Sick Vic versus Miss Fitwell, although that was next season. Season 2, I'd say, was a vast improvement aside from episode quantity, but probably remains one of the best seasons. And Mr. Extremo winning, I guess, was fine, but that does lead to a problem later on, as I'll get to. Season 3, the big one. Yes, those of you who watch the show know about Season 3. Now, Season 3 is always a risk. It can either be the best of the show, like SpongeBob, or the worst, like Gone Together. But either way, this one turned out probably the best until the end. Now, they added probably the most new characters aside from Season 1. They added, like, the massive eating machine Snagglefangs, the crazy French chef Pierre Pamplemousse, the rich egomaniac Buck Skazillion. Oh boy, there's some interesting things around that guy. And it pretty much was exactly like the second season, only the episodes were a little bit longer. Instead of being like 4 minutes or something, they were about 6 minutes or 7 minutes even. Which, of course, was pretty good. They definitely used a lot more of Colonel Cossack, one of the announcers, because he was becoming popular, but at this point, I think they were running out of ideas what to do with him. Granted, it was still pretty funny, like when he was talking to a stack of pancakes or something. Okay, it's kind of hard to explain, but you just kind of have to see it. But you can tell this is their last good foot forward. You can kind of tell by the writing style. Even though it's funny, you can tell they're kind of running on fumes. And this was at the height of the popularity too. But everything was turning out very well up until the championship, because everyone loved Face Off Phil. Even I think he was pretty cool. And then he lost to Buck Skazillion, who was a Sinistra, as we all know. So what does that mean? Senator Skull takes over the Thumb Wrestling Federation? No, because Bucks says no, and then Senator Skull gets defeated somehow because he said no, and no is apparently like a taboo word? I don't know. So now Buck Skazillion is in control of the Thumb Wrestling Federation, which again, why is it not Senator Skull? Because Senator Skull just kind of disappeared at that. But this is where it gets interesting because... Okay, I'm saying because a lot in this video. Anyways, this is pretty interesting, actually. Having a Sinistra take over the Thumb Wrestling Federation, being allowed to do whatever they want. They will do whatever they want, because all those people are horrible people. So what happens? What is this big epic thing that is going to happen to the Thumb Wrestling Federation? Well, I was really excited to find out, well, not like really excited, but just kind of like, oh, this actually could be pretty good. They're actually getting some real good story going. Then Season 4 rolled around, and, that's all they're gonna do? Basically, it just amounted to Bucks Gazillion being in charge and, like, throwing the occasional chair at somebody or the occasional cheating method that would sometimes let them win. It was almost as if he wasn't really in control, but just that he, like, bribed the ref. It was a major letdown. And a lot of people were catching on to this, too, because they also tried some gimmicks where the Big Time and Itsy Bitsy would quit and leave the Sinistras, and it just didn't work. It wasn't very funny. It wasn't good. In fact, the popularity dipped so badly during this season that, for whatever reason, the second half of it wasn't aired in America. You had to watch it in Canada or the United Kingdom. Or YouTube. In fact, for the longest time, I think it was James Montgomery Flagg versus Big Bad Billy Gotetsky, was actually a lost episode because no one could find it. Why do I know so much about this? Well, because I did a lot of research and this episode was like, I don't know, a few months into the making, and I really wanted to know my stuff. Because this is a very interesting show to talk about. And it started taking itself seriously again, like with what happened in Season 1, only this time, again, it had its inflated sense of ego, so it took itself way more seriously than it should have been. It tried to do this big, epic story arc, but it didn't work because that's not what the show's supposed to be. It's supposed to be a little goofy 5-minute wrestling show. It's not supposed to be this epic saga to dethrone a madman billionaire. That's not what it was. And then the championship rolled around, which I was a little happy because the Visitor was there, and, you know, being my favorite and all, but when I of course, given the story elements, I knew he wasn't going to win, and I knew whoever he was going to face would be the champion. Who was it? It was Mr. Extremo again. Yes, the character everyone was getting tired of the most, they brought him back to be this champion again, twice in a row. Or not twice in a row, but twice. Don't you know how boring that is? I mean, Vinny Victory, the leader, hasn't even wrestled since Season 2. Couldn't you bring him back? Wouldn't that be kind of cool for him, being supposedly the main character of the thing, bringing the Thumb Wrestling Federation back to its former glory? But no, you have this dude, Pauly Shore wannabe, fighting an alien. And really, we don't even get to see the match very much because the whole time is just Senator Skull and his cronies breaking into the control room and dethroning Bucks. We don't really get a focus on the match. So the match just feels like an afterthought. If it was going to be like that, why didn't you just devote the whole episode to them dethroning Bucks and then having the championship? Having it alongside it, being in this 6-minute package, is too jarring and too unfocused. You can either split it up, or, here's an idea, prolong the episode like you did the Season 2 championship. The Season 2 championship was about 10 or 11 minutes. You could have done that. But no, you had to just compile it into this 5-6 minute jumble, and then just make the actual match the thing we came to see, an afterthought to the story arc that nobody cared about, and half of the population who watched your show couldn't even watch it to begin with because it never aired because you guys focused on this random story arc that nobody really cared about. Whew. Man, why am I getting so worked up over the show? I mean, really? I guess it just kind of bugs me because they were going off to such a good track and it has showed a lot of good promise, and who knows, maybe it could have been a little bit lasted longer, but I guess Season 4 was just successful enough to get them Season 5. Now, let's review my opinions thus far. Season 1, pretty good. Definitely off to a good start. Season 2, definitely an improvement. Season 3, pretty much the same as Season 2. Season 4, massive downgrade. Had a really bad focus and also inconsistency because sometimes Bucks would cheat, sometimes he wouldn't, sometimes he would be there, sometimes he wouldn't be. And of course the characters were getting, even though they weren't really the most defined characters, they weren't real, they had 1 or 2 traits or something, they were starting to get the traits wrong. How can you mess up characters that are so simple like this? They have 1 or 2 traits. How can you mess up the 1 or 2 traits they have? So then season 5 rolled around. The camera quality was phenomenal, but everything else was garbage. Now, what they tried to do was bring back some characters, again, who we had not seen in years, actually since season 1. Who were they? Well, they were people like the Scorching, Corbata, Gary the Intern, Tomcat, and Unit 19G, people, or wrestlers actually, that people really wanted to see again. But they all lost their matches, and they were all really underused because another little thing I'd like to point out, this happened around season 4, the episodes went from being about 4 minutes to like 2. They were super rushed. I remember in Big Bad Billy Goat versus James Montgomery Flagg, I believe that's the one, the lost episode, one of the rounds I counted was 15 seconds. And it was horribly rushed. I couldn't even tell what was going on, it was so fast. And this one was especially that, because the matches were too fast-paced, they were too jarring and unfocused, that you couldn't tell what was going on! Isn't that kind of point 1 for your show? What the main thing should be is that people know what's going on? It's not that it was confusing or anything because of the story, but it's just because of how unfocused and choppy the writing was. And even then, most of the time they weren't even really wrestling, but just performing like a comedy duo. Specifically in Gary the Intern versus Itsy Bitsy, most of that was just a comedy routine. I mean, they did that sometimes with Milty the Clown character, but he's a clown. It's understandable. He's not trying to wrestle. With this, it's just embarrassing. And again, it still has the inflated ego, even though it's not. They know it's not being aired in America anymore. And their merchandise is taking a massive dip in sales. Well, I wonder why, given how shoddy it was. Even then, they kept trying, and they added 3 new characters. The Black Knight, Lucky O'Leary, and Cleet Cunningham. The Black Knight showed promise. He was an evil knight, Sinistra. I don't know how he survived this long. I mean, it's not like the Lost Viking where he was frozen in a glacier. He's just magically here now. He showed promise, but again, the episode was too quick, so we couldn't really get the gist of him. Same with Lucky O'Leary. He's an Irish Dextera who is very lucky. We don't get enough time to know him, but we do get enough time to know Cleet Cunningham, and he is as boring as paper. And not that interesting like printer paper either. I'm talking about like the brown paper towels you get out of the low-rate gas station bathrooms. He is the most boring character of them. Actually, I'd probably make him worse than Huck. Huck was at least had a personality. This guy's, I'm British and I like soccer. I'm a character. And then there was this really lame story arc going around where they hired him to the Dexteras, and then they were thinking that for whatever reason he was rigging matches and he was cheating and stuff because there was a masked figure who goes around and cheats. But here's a thought I just had. Like how I mentioned with the Captain Esplanade thing instead of Pinky for season 1, wouldn't it be better if Evil Ira went back to the Dexteras and then they were getting really unsure because he was evil for the past 3 seasons, and then all the matches start getting rigged like that and they blame him? Wouldn't that make sense? Because they have 2 new guys on their team and they only blame 1. The other guy, again, he's on the list along with Black Knight. I probably should have put him on there too. Never seen after his match or even mentioned again. The Cleet guy was, and for whatever reason they blame him, and for whatever reason he wins the championship, spoiler alert. Yes, the big time goes back to the championship, and then they wrestle, and it's really boring. It's not very well done. Again, it's more of a comedy thing than a wrestling. I think they might throw, like, what, 10 punches in the whole thing? And then we find out who the masked man was the whole time. Are you ready? It's En Fuego, the dancing Spaniard guy. And there's, oh, I'm so satisfied with this because of all the clues they gave to him, like, nothing. It's as if Scooby-Doo had an episode where it was just the Scooby Gang. There was no other characters in there, and then they find this, I don't know, shadow monster thing. And they chase him through the woods a lot, and then they unmask him and go, oh, Carl Franks, what are you doing here? And they expect you to understand how this person became the monster, even though you haven't seen him before this. and you don't know what his motivation is or anything, because Fuego wasn't even in this season, I don't think. Maybe he was in once, but it doesn't matter. Either way, it makes no sense that it was him, and it was a lame payoff. It has no real semblance of a mystery at all. For one, no one was really trying to prove that Cleet was innocent, and two, it makes no sense. And then, of course, it has to end with see you next season, folks. Yeah, see you next season. It's been 6 years. There hasn't been a season. I think it's canceled. And rightly so, because season 5 was horrible. Absolutely horrible. It tried to cater to the fans and tried to get its fleeing audience back, but it was entirely unsuccessful. Nobody was around to watch the season 5. And rightly so. It just did not turn out well. I mean, granted, like I said, the camera work was a lot better, but that's all I have to say about it. Everything else was really, really bad. So the whole show, Thumb Wrestling Federation, in its entirety, very much varies depending on the season, or even episodes, really, because season 3, their quarterfinals are actually kind of boring, but the semifinals start picking up again. But always the qualifiers are the most exciting, because that's when you get to see characters you're not tired of. Granted, they lose most of the time, but still. Think of all the stuff that you could have done with this. You could have ran with it in the right way because you were getting popular. But no, you had to do the Bucks Gazillion story arc where it wasn't even really a story arc because you guys didn't even do anything with it, and you lost your audience. That's the thing. You have to think through your ideas, or at least bounce them off of people before actually doing something like this, because if you try to do a big epic story arc like this and it doesn't work, you're in a hole, because you can't just abandon it. You can't just stop. You had to keep going, even though people are not interested in it. You can't put a new spin on it either, because then you'll have to spend more time setting it up and people aren't interested in it. See? You gotta be careful about these things. Just like you guys, you were on top pretty much, not like a major thing, but you definitely had a decent following and it was definitely growing. But then you had to make this move and take this turn where the matches were a lot faster paced and a lot more choppy and had this really lame story arc, and there you go. You lost your audience. Now you're not a thing anymore. No one remembers you. And your merchandise is sold for almost nothing because nobody wants to buy it. See? Whew. I don't know why I'm getting so worked up over this, really. I mean, it's just a show about thumb wrestlers. Whoops, sorry, bumped the mic. Anyways, it could have been something a lot more, really. And it's kind of weird to say. It's a show about thumb wrestlers with styrofoam masks, pretty much. But even then, it could have been something better. It could have been something big. But it ended up getting too arrogant and thinking higher of itself than it actually was. And then it went down the road that I'm sure you're all aware of by now because you watched the video. What does the future look like for this show? The show is dead entirely. All the DVDs are gone. It's been taken off iTunes. The merchandise is all but forgotten. Such a shame, but oh well. Oobla-dee, oobla-da, life goes on. What can I say? Well, would I recommend watching it? It really depends on the season. Like I said, seasons 1, 2, and 3, I'd give the okay. I'd give the Archibald seal of approval. But the other two, I'd give the Scallion seal of disapproval. I wouldn't really give it anything else. So, folks, that was my review, or discussion, on the Thumb Wrestling Federation. Yeah, very, very, very mixed bag. And even for what it is, if you are going to go check it out, don't expect Shakespeare or anything. Don't expect something big and grand like Gravity Falls or The Simpsons, or just expect a fun little show that's more of a time waster than anything else. It's not really anything grand, nothing really spectacular, but for what it is, it's probably going to be a guilty pleasure. I mean, the writing is a bit hokey, the characters are kind of stale, but you know what? It's got a special place to me. It's just a little bit of a guilty pleasure that I watch every so often, which, now that I'm in the Willy Wonka play, is pretty much nothing because I have almost no free time. It's a miracle I'm even getting this video out. But overall, Thumb Wrestling Federation existed. And that's all I have to say about that. Alright, people, see you next time.